This.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everyone can see it, but let me know if there's a problem. And so, as Cheryl mentioned, I'm going to talk about a wide range of things of what's happening in the world of Alzheimer's and dementia, because a lot is changing, which is really exciting. And I will also talk about what's normal aging versus when might we need to be concerned and get our brain health checked out. So we're a pretty small group, and as we go along, feel free to ask any questions, and I will pause occasionally to um, see if anyone has any questions as well. All right. And there we go. So I don't know if everyone knows about the Alzheimer's Association, but we are the largest advocacy organization in the world for Alzheimer's and dementia. And we focus on global research, driving risk reduction, early detection, and care and support. So our mission is to really end Alzheimer's and other dementias. These are some stats, lots on here from 2025. Actually, this month we have what's called our facts and figures that come out. So this will be updated. But right now, we know over 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease. And I am going to talk about what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, kind of as a level set, because it is the question that we get asked the most. These are a bunch of, numbers, and behind the numbers are real people. And so you can see it's can be a little overwhelming. We talk about over 7 million people here in the US living with Alzheimer's disease. That's about 94,000 people here in Colorado. We know 1 in 3 older adults dies with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia diagnosis. And while heart disease has gone down, the death from Alzheimer's disease, I should say deaths from heart disease has gone down, deaths from Alzheimer's disease has increased. We know that nearly 12 million Americans provide unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's, and that equates to about $413 billion. We think of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias really oftentimes as a family systems disease. From time of diagnosis until death, then average is about 4 to 8 years for Alzheimer's disease in particular, but people can live as long as 20 years. And that's a really long time to be a caregiver and to be that person living with dementia. And so it often involves maybe a spouse, maybe an adult child, maybe a grandchild, maybe a sibling, maybe neighbors that hopefully people have that support, but sometimes people don't. And sometimes people are living alone and going through this journey, which becomes really challenging. We also know it kills more than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. The risk at age 45 is 1 in 5 for women and 1 in 10 for men. And you can just see, whoops, sorry, that up to 4 out of 5 people are optimistic about treatments, and 92% said that they would want a medication to slow the progression if they were diagnosed. So I'm going to just go to the next slide here. And when we talk about what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, again, that's the question that we get asked the most. And if you can think of dementia as a compilation of symptoms, it's not the disease in and of itself. It doesn't tell us what exactly is happening in the brain, only that someone is presenting with symptoms. And those symptoms tend to be challenges in reasoning and judgment. There might be personality changes, problems with short-term memory. Those are some of the big hallmark symptoms that people see initially in the beginning. And so under why those symptoms are occurring in the first place, Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of disease of why those symptoms are occurring. We think 60 to 80% of all dementia symptoms are from Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is hallmarked by two proteins. One is beta amyloid that tends to clump together in the brain so the neurons can't talk to one another. The other protein is tau, which is in the neuron itself, and it twists upon itself and collapses and causes that neuron to die. So with Alzheimer's disease, again, in particular, the two hallmark proteins are beta amyloid and tau. We think of Alzheimer's disease in general as kind of a slow, steady decline. Vascular, and also one of the main hallmark symptoms early on with Alzheimer's disease is problems with short-term memory because it actually starts in the hippocampus, and that is where we have short-term memory formation. With vascular dementia, it's much like it sounds. It has to do with your vascular health. So someone might be having little microbleeds in their brain. And vascular dementia is a little bit more of a stair-step decline. So someone will be at a certain level, they'll have a little vascular incident, maybe a little TIA or trans-ischemic attack. You'll see a change usually in functionality, and then that person will have a little decline. They'll level out, maybe have another little microbleed and see another little decline. So it's more like a stair step. Dementia with Lewy body, that has a whole different protein that are making those dementia symptoms occur. And dementia with Lewy body has the protein alpha-synuclein. And with dementia with Lewy body, poor short-term memory is not often the hallmark symptom in the beginning. Someone may show like episodic confusion. They may have problems with proprioception. So how do they move their body in space to sit down in a chair, for example? They also may be acting out in their dreams. So if I'm dreaming and in my dream, I'm running, I'm not really running, right? My legs aren't moving in bed. Someone with Lewy body dementia, their legs actually might be moving in bed. There might be a lot of movement when they're in a dream state. They might accidentally hit a partner in bed because, again, there can be that movement. Frontal temporal dementia, you may have heard about because the actor Bruce Willis has frontal temporal dementia. And there are two different variants. One is a behavioral variant, and the other one is an aphasia variant, which is what Bruce Willis has. So that problems with receptive and expressive communication. And the behavioral variant, people tend to have either one or two things. One, they might be very obsessive, kind of compulsive type behavior, or on the flip side of that, a very apathetic type behavior. With frontal temporal dementia in particular, we know it tends to happen in people from ages 40 to 60 and not so much in late life. There's always exceptions to the rule, but in general, it's between the ages of 40 and 60. So typically younger. And then you'll see these are just the kind of most common ones. There's lots of different types of dementia. And then there's something called mixed dementia, which we know is much more common than we ever thought. So it might be a combination that someone has Alzheimer's disease and, say, vascular dementia. And so these are, again, the most common types, and that dementia, just think of it as a compilation of symptoms. It's like if I tell you I have a cough, that's not really my disease, right? It's my symptom. Why do I have a cough? Do I have pneumonia? Do I have COVID? Do I have the flu? Do I have lung cancer? There can be lots of reasons why. And so we like to say it's always good to figure out the why. When we talk about populations that are at higher risk, we know that Black Americans are about twice as likely as white Americans to develop Alzheimer's or another dementia. Hispanics 1.5 times, and why those populations, we're not exactly sure. And the same with women. We know that almost 2/3 of all people living with Alzheimer's disease are women. There's ongoing studies, some of that for people of color tends to be potentially health disparities, and so that could play a role, not the only reason. So those are ongoing research studies that are actually happening. And then we know genetics also play a role. So if I have a close family member, I might have an increased risk for developing dementia. There are two different types of genes. One is a deterministic gene, and if you carry, there's mutations on some chromosomes, presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and amyloid precursor protein are the most common ones. And if you carry a mutation on one of these chromosomes, You will definitely get Alzheimer's disease, but it's about 1 to 2% of the world's population that actually carry this gene. We do know that there's a family in Greeley that carries this gene. There's a family in Cheyenne that carries this gene. And most of these families, because it is just so prevalent in their families, they're involved in what's called the DIAN study, which is Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network, based out of Washington University in St. Louis. And I mention these families because we owe so much of what we know about Alzheimer's in particular to these families, because for a long time, all we could do was research on autopsy on brains that were, very advanced with Alzheimer's disease. These families in these studies, we can study their biomarkers in real time to see the changes that are happening in the brain and when that person actually presents with symptoms and what's the biology happening in the brain. And so they have really advanced the science, which is very exciting. There's also something called risk factor genes. The most common one is an APOE4 gene. You may have heard about it because it's been in the news fairly frequently, off and on. But you get an APOE gene, a copy from each parent, and it can be in a combination of an APOE2, APOE3, or APOE4. So if you get an APOE4, one from each parent, you have an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's disease compared to the general population. It does not mean that you will get Alzheimer's disease, definitely. It just means you have an increased risk. So there are some other risk factor genes that seem to be coming to light as we learn more about Alzheimer's disease. But that's sometimes, again, why you might see it run in families is the deterministic gene or a risk factor gene that the family might carry. Before I go into the warning signs, is there any questions about the disease in particular?
I have a quick question. With
Uh-huh.
the statistics are really very informative. And one was the 1 in 5 are women and 2/3 likely. And you said it's kind of unknown, but is there any research that's pointing to why? Just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, so for a long time, so one of the things I also didn't say on here, age is also one of the greatest risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease. The older we get, we have an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's or another dementia. And so women tend to live longer than men. So for a long time, they chalked it up to that. Oh, it's because women live longer. If age is a risk factor, then that's why. It's a lot more complicated than that. There research now studying hormones. Also, recently, maybe a year ago, they found a mutation on the X chromosome, and women have two. So that might also explain why we have an increased risk. So it's something that is definitely being studied and why representation in research is so important, whether it's gender or different populations. So we don't have a definitive answer at this point in time. But great question.
Oh,
I'll ask later. Maybe they'll have.
anyone else with a question? Okay.
The other thing that we do know is that people can have the biology happening in their brain about a decade before they actually present with symptoms. And so we'll talk also about why early detection is so important. But when we go through these warning signs, I can guarantee you that there's probably many things on here all of us do occasionally. What's really important, and I think the thing to remember is what is different for the person. If I am a person, for example, if I'm a person that I always keep my house super neat and tidy, and all of a sudden my kids come over, my house is a mess, things are different in my environment, that could be a warning sign of dementia. So again, all of these things that I'm going to talk about, we all have done probably occasionally, but I'm talking kind of the next level, and I'll try to give some examples. So, memory loss that disrupts daily life. I know a lady who has early stage Alzheimer's and she lives on her own and she's is safe to do so. And she has yellow sticky notes all over her house, just to remind her to turn off the light, lock the door. Um, it's different than I'm writing myself a note for my groceries or, to remind me of an appointment. This is like this person needs these cues constantly. So that's kind of a next level thing. Challenges in planning or solving problems. We actually have a whole entire 1 hour class on just the warning signs. And there's a video clip in the class about a gentleman who was a pilot and he was in the early stages of dementia and he was still flying and he realized he would do these long flights and you have to do fuel burns. And he said it used to be something that he really could do very easily, and it just became really challenging for him to be able to do that. People might be able to still solve problems or plan, but it just takes so much effort to do so. Difficulty completing familiar tasks. So if cooking involves a lot of steps and it's these steps and the planning that can become challenging for people. So if I have made this recipe 1,000 times and I've got it down and all of a sudden I become confused by it, or maybe not even all of a sudden over time, it just becomes harder and harder for me to prepare dinner, to have a meal come out all at the same time. Or if I have a friend whose husband was an architect and she asked him to make some bookshelves, and it's something that would have been very easy for him to do in the past, and he just struggled even getting started with it. And that was kind of an aha moment for her. She was like, oh, something's happening here because normally this would have been easy for him. So if things start to become really challenging for us that are very familiar to us, that could be a warning sign. Confusion with time or place. Lives are very busy these days. But again, I knew a woman who was a teacher, and her coworkers actually called her husband and said, we're worried about her because she's showing up at meetings that aren't scheduled and missing meetings that are. And she was just having a really hard time just with her schedule, being able to follow it. We also know that people get lost driving. And I will take Fort Collins for example. A lot, it's a big town now, and if I don't drive to one area of town in a while, I'm like, oh my gosh, where did that neighborhood pop up? Am I in the right space? But this is where if you've been driving to your grocery store and all of a sudden you end up in Loveland, Colorado, then something's happening, right? So we need to check that out. And that's really common. Getting lost while driving can be more common and happens than what you realize. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. So we know early on that people start to have problems with their depth perception in particular. So someone may still be driving and they go to pull in a parking space and they might sideswipe a car, or they might back out and hit a car because they're really having a hard time judging that distance. With Alzheimer's disease in particular, as the disease progresses, people start to lose their peripheral vision and sometimes end up with binocular or monocular vision. So that challenges again with vision. And people oftentimes will sometimes go to the eye doctor because they know something's wrong and they think maybe it's glaucoma or macular degeneration. It's actually just the way their brain is perceiving information. And this is also sometimes different coloring tile on a floor, for example. If there is a light coloring floor and all of a sudden there's a dark rug, that might look like a hole to that person. So again, that depth perception becomes a challenge. New problems with words in speaking or writing. So a person may not be able, now we have all done this where you've not been able to recall the word that you want, or maybe remember, sometimes even telling a story and you're like, what was my point here? We all do that occasionally, but this is again next level. So someone is really having a challenge communicating and may not be able to use the right words. So they're really having a challenge with that. Number seven, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. Again, we've all lost something, but if we are losing things constantly, then that again might mean our life is just chaotic, or it means that maybe something's going on. This is also a time where people start to show a little bit of suspicion and paranoia. Because if I think that I laid my purse down next to Betty, and I'm 100% certain that's where I put it, but really I stuck it under my mattress. But I don't remember I did that, right? I think I put it next to Betty. I'm going to ask Betty what she did with my purse, why it's not there anymore. So people are trying to make sense of their world. So it's not that they're being accusatory. It's just, again, they're trying to make sense of the world. So not being able to recall things, and you can imagine how difficult that would be to navigate your environment, not having that short-term memory. Number eight, decreased or poor judgment. There has been some research out there. Now, scams are very sophisticated these days, and anybody can fall prey to a scam. We also know from some research that people might actually be in the early stages of dementia. They're starting to lose that reasoning and judgment. And so that if you have a family member or a friend that you're just like, oh my gosh, they just donated $10,000 to some group that you've never heard of, or, it doesn't have to be that extreme, but you get what I'm saying is that whenever you notice that someone's doing something very out of character for them. Number nine, withdraw from work or social activities. And so, again, I knew a gentleman who was an attorney, and he was having a lot of stress in his life and was having problems with his memory. And so he and his wife thought that this was maybe from his work. And so he retired early. And then, again, oftentimes there's just this kind of moment where people are like, okay, something's going on here. And for them, they went to a party, and her husband was typically the gentleman, the attorney was kind of a life of the party person, really engaged with other people, loved socializing. They were with a group of friends, and she was like, "Where's my husband?" And looked off, and her husband was by himself. And for her, it could be lots of things. It could be depressed. It could be lots of reasons, but that was like something else is going on. And that was their kind of aha moment. And he was later diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So withdrawing. And it could be for lots of reasons, but part of the reason is just being able to be in a group, understand all the conversations. If you're having problems with word finding, being able to participate in the conversation could be overwhelming. So again, it could be a symptom. And then number 10, changes in mood or personality. And this is where seemingly little things get blown out of proportion, or that person might just seem like they're on edge and get agitated easily or anxious easily. And so that could be a warning sign as well. And the changes in mood and personality can happen with all dementias, and can in particular, especially with frontal temporal dementia. But you might saying, it could also be with Alzheimer's disease. So these are kind of the hallmark warning signs. You don't have to have all 10. You might just, everybody's brain's different, every person's different. You might just have one or two. But if this is uncharacteristic for you or your family member, someone that you're noticing these changes in, it investigates figuring out what's going on with their brain health. And so when we talk about the importance of early detection, why it's important, because it could be lots of things that are happening that aren't going down the dementia path. It could be that a person is depressed or has a low thyroid or a low B12, or they're dehydrated or too much alcohol. Lots of reasons why things could be affecting our brain health. So it's really important to get it figured out. because now we also know that if in the early stages, that there are also treatments available if someone is interested in a treatment path. It also helps plan for the future. It also helps if we know what we're dealing with. Oftentimes people will say, well, if a person has dementia, does it matter if it's Alzheimer's or Lewy body dementia or frontal temporal dementia? It does, because the treatment for Alzheimer's disease is only for Alzheimer's disease, not other types of dementia. And we know that there are also some other medications that are better for a certain dementia than another dementia. And it's like if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, well, you have cancer, they don't just stop there. What kind of cancer? Because my treatment's going to be different. So it's always really important to figure out the why. Why is this happening? And for a long time, there weren't treatments. And so people didn't feel this impetus. Unfortunately, even then, if something's going on with our brain health, can be scary. And so I think oftentimes people don't want to pursue it. But we're really letting people know that early detection is so important for all the various reasons I just described. And then how was Alzheimer's diagnosed? Before I go on, does anyone have questions about the warning signs?
I have another question, Angel. Um, the warning signs, as the Alzheimer's progresses, do each of the signs then progress, or is it possible to stick into just one warning sign? I mean, I think that there is a progression, or does some medication help with that? So is there a warning sign initially, and then there's going to be more down the road? And then after me, I see that Stacy has a question too.
Yeah, so I mean, the disease progresses. What happens to each individual is oftentimes you hear the saying, one person living with Alzheimer's disease, one person living with Alzheimer's disease, because it can be quite different from person to person. But if I am having problems with language, I am probably not all of a sudden not going to have problems with language. But there is probably a point where I am going to have problems with sus potentially suspicion. I might also have problems with that reasoning and judgment. So it does kind of accumulate over time. And as the disease progresses throughout the brain, typically one of the biggest problems then towards end stage is swallowing. So it starts, that mind-body connection is being lost. And so after some time, I might not be able to walk. I will, so not knowing when I'm hungry or thirsty, or what if I'm having pain. So in the beginning, these symptoms can be varied from person to person. As it progresses, the disease becomes more similar. That makes sense. Stacy, let's see, you had a question in the chat.
Yeah, it looks like maybe two people have questions.
Right. One is,
I don't know. Can you hear her?
I can't.
No, so I'll just tell me what your question is and I'll ask him.
um, sorry, I've gone a bit brain dead. Oh, she doesn't mention. I'm right. Some of these symptoms, if you have like a few of these symptoms in a less dramatic thing, my deal is right now, I'm having trouble with names, and I used to always be really good with remembering names. And so I just was wondering about that continuing, or if it's a smaller portion of not remembering stuff versus mega, if it might be the beginning of dementia.
Okay. So did you catch some of that, or you
Yeah,
really said it?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a good question. I think that if we and I'll start with like the physical exam here when we're talking about diagnosis. Anytime that we're concerned about something that might be different for us, it's always good just to talk with your physician about it. Now, at the Medicare wellness exam, they should be doing a screening, a mini mental status exam, or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment are two very common ones. And that's where they can get, they're not super sensitive tools, but it does help get a baseline of what might be happening. And there's, again, there's lots of reasons of why something might be going on. It could be that, you're having disruption in your sleep, or, there's lots of different reasons why. But it's always important because after a while, what happens is we're not the best to observe our own brain health. If we are going down the path of dementia, we know that it takes a certain amount of brain health to know what's going on with ourselves. And so some people might not have the wherewithal to recognize that anymore. And it's really important then to also pay attention when family members might share that they're concerned, or other people around you. So it's just always worth having a conversation to let your clinician know that, hey, I just noticed this. And it may be nothing, or it may be something that you need to figure out and have a further workup for.
You did.
Where can we get a copy of the 10 warning signs?
I will send out this whole PowerPoint to Cheryl, who can disseminate it to people.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angel.
Yeah. So if we are feeling like we're having concerns, or someone has shared, hey, I've noticed some changes. We start with your physician, and they're going to do lab work, because they're going to rule out things first. They're going to rule out if you're dehydrated, or if you do have a low B12 or a low thyroid. They're going to do a depression screening, because all of these things can mimic dementia-like symptoms. So they're going to rule out. They're going to do a neurological exam, typically like an MRI, to look at your brain health, and look at the vascular health in your brain. Is there brain shrinkage? What's going on there? That cognitive testing that is mentioned here, that I mentioned, like the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. We also know now a PET scan is available to also diagnose. And then the other thing that is really exciting, and they're not doing it on their own right now, but a blood test. In that blood test, they're looking at the accumulation of beta amyloid, or tau. Right now, that blood test is being done in conjunction with all of these other things. What the future is looking like is that, much like when you go to your doctor and they check for your heart health and you have blood work done, and they're looking at your triglycerides and your cholesterol. And if it's a certain level, they might say, well, you need a medication, or maybe change lifestyle. That is the future for Alzheimer's disease as well. We're not there yet, but looking at, when I get blood work done, they're also going to look at, well, are you starting to accumulate beta amyloid or tau, depending on the biomarker they're doing. And from that, do we need to change lifestyle, or is there treatment? And again, this is just for Alzheimer's disease. This is not for other dementias. Right now, that blood work is just being done for people that show symptoms. So you can't go to your doctor and ask for a blood test if you're not showing any symptoms. So we're not there yet for that. But they will do it in conjunction with these other things right now, to one of the added diagnostics. So it's really exciting, because in the future, if we can do a blood test to diagnose versus having to have an MRI or cerebral spinal fluid, they can also look at the beta amyloid in the cerebral spinal fluid. These are expensive and invasive tests. So having the future of just having a blood test is really exciting. Any questions on that? Okay. So we know with Alzheimer's disease, it was first diagnosed back in 1906 from Dr. Alois Alzheimer's, which is why it's called Alzheimer's disease. And his first patient was in her late 30, I think she was like 39, and died in her early 40s. And it was from that autopsy that they looked at that hallmark, those beta amyloid and protein clumps. And so you can see there was nothing at all to treat Alzheimer's disease until 1996. And for a really long time, until we get to 2020, there really still wasn't a lot. The medications that are in kind of that light peachy color from 1996 to 2014, those never stopped the progression of the disease. The disease is still progressing. What they did do was help the neurons communicate to one another for a short period of time. And so it's really common when someone gets a diagnosis of Alzheimer's and frankly, any other dementia to start one of these medications. And typically there can be some GI distress, not big side effects. And oftentimes if a person isn't having GI distress, oftentimes this person might stay on this medication their whole time. Because sometimes families are afraid to take them off because they're not sure if people will get worse or whatever, but they're really used for a short period of time. And then you see a couple of medications that are for symptoms of mood or quote unquote behavior. I don't like to use the word behavior, but Balsomra, that's for sleep, and Rexulti. And I think Rexulti is actually being marketed like you see it on commercials now. Oftentimes, before these two medications, these medications have actually had research behind them that they help people living with Alzheimer's disease. Oftentimes, what would happen before this is that someone might have a change in mood. And so medications that are used for mental health were being used for dementia. And there wasn't a lot of research to show that that was actually beneficial for that person. And so these are two medications that have actually had specific research done for people living with Alzheimer's disease. And then the big jump that happened in 2021 was a medication called aducanumab that came out. And you'll see aducanumab, lecanemab, donanemab. These are all mAb drugs, monoclonal antibody. And what that means, it's pinpointing a particular protein, and in this case, beta amyloid, and it is removing that beta amyloid out of the brain, hence slowing the progression of the disease. Now, aducanumab, or Aduhelm is the trade name, is no longer on the market. Medicare never covered that medication. The FDA approved it. There was a lot of controversy. These medications can have serious side effects like brain swelling. This Aduhelm was done by injection. In fact, all three of these medications in the purple are done by injection or infusion, sorry. So you have to go to an infusion center. So that 2021 is no longer on the market. Leqembi is still on the market and it's done by infusion. You go to an infusion center, and after you've done the infusion, after 18 months, they change that to an injection. So a person can do an injection at home. And then Kinsella is the other medication that came out in 2024. That medication is actually being researched now, not only for mild cognitive impairment or mild or early stage dementia, but also looking at this medication. If someone's at risk, can it be preventative? So there's some research happening for that as well. So really exciting. This is changing the landscape of Alzheimer's disease in particular. These are only good for Alzheimer's disease, not other types of dementia. But if someone does have a verified diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, one of these medications a person could potentially use for treatment. Access is still a problem because these are only done at infusion centers. So I serve 14 counties across northern Colorado. And so Rangeley, Colorado, on the western side of the state, there's not a close infusion center. Salt Lake is probably the closest infusion center. So they are working on a pill form for some of these medications, and that could be the future. But this is a start, and this is huge because, again, it's the first time ever that there's something to slow the progression of the disease. Not a cure, but this is a start. So it's a very, very exciting time. Before I go on to the next thing, does anyone have questions about those medications?
I do.
Uh-huh.
It, you were saying that people can't take those unless they've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but on the chart it looked like the infusion ones could be started when someone only had mild cognitive impairment.
Right. So you're right. Mild cognitive impairment with looking at the beta amyloid and or the tau has to be at a certain level though. So there's mild cognitive impairment that is down the path of Alzheimer's disease. So if you don't have the beta amyloid or tau accumulation, then it's not going to be an option.
Okay, so if someone had mild cognitive impairment with those two proteins, then they could be eligible for the infusions, but not without those,
Right.
both of those. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is removing beta amyloid. So if you don't have beta amyloid, then there's not a point to using these medications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we have something called the Alzheimer's Association International Conference that they host every year. It's in the summer. And from that conference, it brings researchers from around the globe. And this is oftentimes, well, you'll hear things in the news about what's happening in the world of Alzheimer's or other dementias because this conference is going on. Right now, you see that there's over $450 million currently in 1,200 projects in 56 countries around the world, which is really exciting because this is really advancing the science. And from that, what happened last year's conference is something called the US Pointer Study that really focuses. So it's not just medications that is being researched. There's lots of different things that are happening on the research front. And one of the things is how do we potentially prevent Alzheimer's or another dementia in the first place? So there was about 2010, I think it was, called the Finger Study, and that was done in Finland. And from that study, it really looked like lifestyle choices could help decrease our risk for dementia. A couple of years ago, the Lancet Commission actually came out and said almost up to 50% of dementias, we could reduce our risk by our lifestyle choices. So from that finger study that happened in Finland, the Alzheimer's Association did what's called the US Pointer Study. In 5 cities around the US, very diverse populations involved in the study, and everyone was at risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. And what they had 2 groups of people. One group really had a lot of support. They met on a regular basis. They had peer-to-peer kind of counseling. They were really given very prescriptive kind of, here's what you do. The other group was given the same information, but not that kind of follow-up support on a continual basis. It was kind of like, well, here's what you should do. Good luck. What happened, though, from that study is that both of these groups actually improved their cognitive health over time. Now, the group that had the more structure improved more, but both groups did. And these are the things that they really focused on. So physical health and exercise, 30 to 35 minutes of moderate to intense aerobic exercise 4 times a week, plus strength and flexibility exercises twice a week. Health monitoring. So really paying attention to blood sugar, weight, lab results, that if a person has diabetes, that diabetes is under control, because all of those things impact our vascular health. They also looked at something called the MIND diet. And the MIND diet is the Mediterranean diet, which I think most people are familiar with. So those healthy fats, lots of fruits and vegetables, lean meats. And then also the DASH diet, which is Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension. And that's from the American Heart Association. Those two diets together are the MIND diet. So making sure that we're not eating a lot of processed foods, that it's mostly whole foods. And I don't mean the grocery store, but looking at those, again, those healthy fats, lean meats, don't have to be vegan, but it does mean really, really strongly paying attention to diet and then our sodium level. And if you look at, you go shopping in the store and you look at the sodium content in food and start paying attention to it, it's amazing. It can be very sneaky getting into our food. So paying attention to that sodium level. And then they also did cognitive exercises. And in this particular study, they did, I think it's Brain HQ was the platform that they used. And they did computerized brain training programs 3 times a week for 30 minutes. Again, and then also into that was also being involved socially, but also just engaging your brain. So that was really kind of the secret sauce. And so from this were kind of 10 healthy habits that they really focused on. And you can see here the managing diabetes, maintaining a healthy weight, controlling your blood pressure, and being smoke-free. Again, all of this impacts our vascular health. So it's good for our hearts, good for our brain. So it's really important to stay focused on what we can do to maintain that good vascular health. The challenging your mind and staying in school, it just means, being a lifelong learner, staying engaged, being curious, and which kudos to you guys because you're all here today, learning something new. Protecting your head, we know that head trauma can increase a person's risk for dementia. You might have heard of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which professional football players or soccer players can get from that repeated head injury. So making sure that, we do all the steps that we can to stop that. Exercise, again, it goes back to that vascular health. Exercise is really important. Sleeping well is really important because we know when we're in deep sleep that we actually flush out the beta amyloid is one of the kind of toxins that build up in our brain. And when we're in deep sleep, it flushes out through our cerebral spinal fluid. So making sure that we're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep most nights if we can. And then again, that nutrition piece becomes really important. If we can do these things most days, it actually really will help decrease our risk potentially for developing Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. I know we're kind of getting to the end here. Just wanted to share some of the resources that we have. We have a 24/7 helpline. It's all across the US. People can call anytime, wanting to know community resources, wanting to know strategies, wanting to know what is the diagnostic process. I listened to this presentation and I don't remember. Our helpline will be able to help answer those type of questions. Or if it's 2 a.m. and you are a care partner caring for someone living with dementia, you can call and just have someone to talk to. So they are available. We offer a lot of education, in-person webinars, pre-recorded classes. They're all available. You can see on our website, which is alz.org. We also have a lot of support groups in Larimer County. So we have a lot of in-person, a couple of virtual ones. We have a support group for people living with dementia in the early stage that's virtual. So lots of different support groups. I think I saw Wendy on here. She has a sandwich generation support group for those caring for someone, caring for a parent and then still having kids at home. So lots of different types of support groups. We have this app, if people are into apps, called My Alz Journey that you can download. It's free and it's for either the person living with dementia or a care partner. It takes you down 2 different tracks depending on how you answer the questions to share resources as well. And then just we have a fundraiser here in Larimer County, Walk to End Alzheimer's. That happens this year. It's at Canvas Stadium, and I don't remember the date. I think it's in October. I should know that, but
September 29th is the tentative date.
thank you. September 29th. We have another one called Do What You Love, where people can do their own thing and do a fundraiser. And then, oh, I do have a list of our support groups. So here are some of our support groups. So you can see lots of different things. Fort Collins, Estes Park, Loveland. And then if you didn't get a chance to record your attendance through the link in the chat, you can also do it here as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we just have a couple of minutes left, but happy to answer any questions that you might have. None?
Wait, hold on. Yeah, no, Carrie.
Good information on the Alzheimer's, but I don't feel that I got enough information on normal aging. You know, that there was normal aging versus dementia, and I just don't know for sure about whether I got the information on some symptoms. It might just be normal aging versus dementia.
That's what I was.
Yeah, I'll send out a PDF that there's really no magic answer. I think it's what's different for you. And I think if you have concerns about your brain health, then I think it's worth investigating. Again, maybe you were great at names, like you said, and now you're not. Are there other things showing up that you might be concerned about, or is that just it? And again, maybe as we get older, we've been storing lots of information, right? And so sometimes our processor is a little slow pulling up information. Oftentimes we can eventually pull it up, just not right when we want to. But again, if there's something that you are thinking that might be feeling very different than what your normal is, quote unquote normal, then it is worth talking to your clinician about it. But I will share this.
Sorry.
I'll share the PowerPoint. I'll send out a PDF in particular that kind of gives maybe a couple of more examples, normal versus when to be concerned kind of aging.
I do a small question.
Okay. There's another person here with a question.
Mm-hmm.
So on your preventative 10 things that you had on the little chart, you one of them was intense aerobic exercise. And that's a little bit difficult for me to swallow because our age group averages 75 to 85 years old. So
And that's really,
yeah, go ahead.
No, and that's a good point. I think it's really important to remember that exercise can be adaptive, right? It doesn't mean that we go run a marathon, but what it means is raising our heart rate a little bit based on what our normal is. It can even be sitting in a chair and raising your arms up and down, because when you're raising your arms up and down, you're forcing that blood to go up above your head, and it actually increases your heart rate. So there are a lot of little things. I think when we think about aerobic exercise, it becomes very overwhelming to people and maybe not even want to sometimes get started, where it can be simple things that can raise our heart rate a little bit, what's normal for us. And if you're not doing anything, it's also one of those things, again, to check with your doctor about what is safe for you, because everyone's health is so different. And the starting place of where we're starting from can be very different, but doesn't mean we can't do anything. Usually there's something, no matter our status, something that we can do to help get our heart rate going a little bit.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yes, thank you. Not high intensity, Wendy said. I think when we say exercise, people go to like the hardest thing they've ever thought of. They're like, I can't do that. Um, but there are some, and I think that's also an opportunity to talk with a physician and maybe having physical therapy for a short period of time to show you some exercises or some things that you could do that could be helpful.
It feels like it's a good opportunity to really stay connected with friends who can offer feedback in terms of measuring your baseline performance or behavior with regards to normal aging or behavior signs. But connection is so vital to, as you said, it was one of our lifestyle changes, to stay engaged, but that could help us measure, or if you have friends who are going to be honest when something, because I might notice something changing a little bit, but that could become normal to me then. And
Right.
so if I don't have somebody objectively saying, "Gee, I kind of noticed something," but it could. So from that perspective of aging versus a behavior changed, could it be helpful? But also the social could help with regards to the active lifestyle. You might not. I'm not a gym person, and I've never been a gym person. Stay away from there. But when I hear exercise, my mind goes to, oh, you've got to go to a gym and you've got to push, no pain, no gain. But a friend, like you say, adaptive, where there's a friend who you can do things with, I think helps with the engagement and also the physical activity. So that's my offer of promoting the friendship who can offer feedback objectively and help each other.
No, that's a great point, Cheryl. And, for a number of years, I worked in a day program and I led the exercises, and they were all from the chair. And people with varying conditions. Some people have had a stroke, people that weren't very mobile, but we were able to do some pretty decent exercises. And so, again, we don't have to go to the gym.
Good answer. I found this so incredibly informative. So I thank you so, so much, Angel. The new information, and I feel optimistic and hopeful with all the new medications coming on board. And I think that there's going to continue to be advancements. I want to let everyone know I put my email in the chat, info@pafclarimer.org, if you would like a copy of today's presentation and the PDF for, was it the normal aging versus, and we'll have a recording of this as well that I can share. So I just want to thank you so much. This was so valuable and just good information.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Right.
So thank you to everyone for coming today, and reach out if you have any questions or would like the PDF and PowerPoint. So everyone stay well, and we'll see you next month at our next Lunch and Learn. So thank you. Bye for now.